The porcelain teacup tumbled from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor just as the manila folder landed with a sharp thud in front of me. Hot tea splashed across my wrist, but the burning sensation felt distant compared to the ice-cold dread spreading through my chest. 23 pairs of eyes fixed on me from around the mahogany dining table, each gaze carrying a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed glee. My name is Maya, and this Christmas Eve dinner at my husband's family estate was about to change everything. "What's inside?" I whispered, my voice barely audible despite the silence that had fallen over the room. "Custody papers," Victor announced, his tone as casual as if he were commenting on the weather. My husband of 7 years sat there like a stranger, not even bothering to meet my eyes. Before I could process his words, Helena, my mother-in-law, dabbed her lips with a silk napkin and smiled with practiced coldness. "We thought it would be more civilized to handle this with witnesses present," she said, each syllable dripping with false courtesy. "Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support." Civilized for whom? The question caught in my throat as I looked around the table. My sister-in-law Veronica smirked behind her wine glass, clearly savoring every moment of my humiliation. "You're fighting for custody on Christmas Eve?" I repeated slowly, each word feeling like broken glass in my mouth. "Darling," Helena continued, her steel-gray eyes boring into mine, "we all know you were never truly suitable as a mother. That little digital art hobby of yours proves you live in fantasy rather than reality." Under the table, my best friend Carmen squeezed my hand. She was the only reason I hadn't fled the moment I walked through those imposing oak doors. The untouched prime rib on my plate suddenly looked revolting. I had never felt so exposed, so utterly betrayed. "Oh, please," Veronica chimed in with mock sympathy, "everyone knows your online art classes are just an excuse to avoid real responsibilities. Sophie needs stability, not some wannabe influencer for a mother." Laughter rippled around the table like poison. Even distant cousins I barely knew couldn't suppress their amused grins. I searched Victor's face desperately, looking for any trace of the man who once stayed up all night helping me edit my first digital art tutorial. But he stared at his plate as if I were invisible. "We're simply trying to help you face reality," Helena said, folding her napkin with theatrical precision. "This family requires someone more grounded." I took a shaky breath, my hand instinctively moving to my purse. Inside was something I'd discovered 3 months ago while organizing our home office, a backup drive containing years of Victor's private correspondence with his business partners. Messages that revealed illegal tax schemes, money laundering, and worse. Evidence I'd been too shocked to know what to do with. Until now. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, rising from my chair, tea still dripping from my sleeve. "I don't belong in this family." Finally, Victor muttered, looking up with relief. "Carmen, could you drive me to the police station?" I asked, turning to my stunned friend. "I have something important to report." The clatter of dropped silverware filled the air. "What could you possibly need to report?" Helena's voice cracked slightly. I smiled, not warmly, but with the kind of cold determination that could freeze fire. "Merry Christmas, Helena. I hope you enjoy explaining to federal investigators why your family's charity foundation has been funneling money to offshore accounts." And with that, I walked away from the table, ignoring the eruption of voices behind me, ignoring Victor's panicked shouts. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. Carmen drove through the snow-covered streets in stunned silence, while I clutched the backup drive, my wrist still throbbing from the tea burn. The city lights blurred past like fallen stars, each one representing a choice I could have made differently over the years. At the emergency room, a young doctor treated my minor burn with gentle efficiency. "Just first degree," she assured me. "You'll heal completely." If only emotional wounds were so simple to diagnose. Back at Carmen's downtown apartment, I powered up my laptop and accessed the files I'd been too afraid to examine closely before. Bank statements, encrypted emails, and recorded phone calls. It was all there. Years of the Sterling family using their charitable foundation as a front for tax evasion and money laundering. Maya, are you absolutely certain about this? Carmen asked, setting down a mug of chamomile tea. I looked at my oldest friend, the one person who'd never laughed at my dreams of becoming a digital artist, who'd supported me through every creative struggle. I've been silent for too long, I said, my voice steady for the first time all evening. Now it's their turn to face consequences. The next morning, FBI Special Agent Rodriguez arrived at Carmen's apartment carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of expression that meant business. No emotion, no judgment, just professional focus. What's our first step? I asked, settling across from her at the kitchen table. We verify the authenticity of these files, she said, examining the backup drive. Then we build an airtight case. Financial crimes of this magnitude carry serious federal penalties. I nodded, feeling oddly calm. The time for fear had passed. That evening, I returned to the Sterling estate, not as a rejected daughter-in-law, but as a federal witness. The imposing mansion looked smaller somehow, its grandeur revealed as nothing more than an expensive facade. I didn't knock. I rang the doorbell because I had every legal right to be there. Victor answered, his face pale and drawn. Maya, about last night dash. This isn't about last night, I interrupted, handing him the federal subpoena. It's about the last 7 years. He stepped aside reluctantly. The living room still smelled of expensive cologne and old money, but now it felt like a mausoleum. Helena sat rigid on her antique sofa, surrounded by family members who suddenly looked far less confident than they had been 24 hours ago. What is this? She demanded, eyeing the official document I placed on her precious coffee table. A federal subpoena, I replied calmly. You're all required to appear before a grand jury regarding charity fraud and money laundering. The color drained from Helena's face. Veronica's wine glass slipped from her fingers. You have no proof of anything, Helena whispered. Actually, I do. I pulled out a printed email, just one page of hundreds. This is Victor discussing how to hide overseas payments through your children's charity. Signed, dated, and very illegal. I left them in that suffocating room, drowning in their own silence. 3 weeks later, the news broke across every major outlet. Sterling Family Foundation under federal investigation. The reporters seemed almost gleeful as they detailed the alleged crimes, millions in charity funds diverted to personal accounts, fake donor receipts, tax evasion schemes spanning nearly a decade. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, but I ignored them all. This wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about justice. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Helena was arrested on federal charges. Victor, desperate to avoid prison, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a plea deal. The family's assets were frozen pending investigation. And through it all, I focused on the one thing that mattered, my daughter Sophie. The custody hearing was a formality. With Victor's legal troubles and the family's reputation in ruins, the judge awarded me full custody without hesitation. Mommy, Sophie said as we walked out of the courthouse, her small hand in mine, are we going home now? I looked down at my 7-year-old daughter, her dark eyes full of trust and innocence, and realized something profound. We weren't going back to the Sterling estate. We weren't returning to a life built on lies and cruelty. We were going to build something new. 6 months later, I stood in the main room of what was once a rundown community center, now transformed into the Digital Arts Academy. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating workstations where teenagers learned video editing, digital painting, and content creation. This wasn't just a school. It was a sanctuary for young artists who'd been told their dreams weren't practical, their creativity wasn't valuable. Carmen entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, surveying the bustling classroom with obvious pride. Remember when you thought you were just a hobbyist? I laughed, watching a group of students collaborate on an animated short film. Turns out destroying one family's legacy was exactly what I needed to build my own. My phone chimed with a notification. Another message from a major streaming platform interested in acquiring the documentary series my students and I had been producing about digital art and social justice. The same platforms that had once rejected my work were now competing for my attention. "Maya," a familiar voice called from the entrance. I turned to see Sophie running toward me, her backpack bouncing as she moved. Behind her walked Mrs. Chin, the after-school coordinator, smiling warmly. "How was school today, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling to hug my daughter. "I made this for you," Sophie said, pulling out a digital tablet displaying a colorful drawing of two figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a building labeled Maya's Art School. My throat tightened with emotion. "It's beautiful, Sophie. Just like you." As I looked around the thriving academy, filled with young voices and creative energy, I realized something the Sterling family never understood. True power doesn't come from tearing others down or hoarding wealth. It comes from lifting others up, from turning your pain into purpose. The backup drive that exposed their crimes wasn't just evidence, it was the key that unlocked my real life. A life where my daughter could grow up seeing her mother not as a victim, but as someone who fought for what was right. Helena Sterlin had said I live in fantasy. She was wrong. I lived in possibility. And that possibility had just begun. Maya's story proves that sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the catalyst for our greatest transformations. She didn't just survive her family's cruelty, she used their own weapons against them to build something beautiful. In real life, we all face moments when we must choose between staying silent and speaking the truth. When we choose courage over comfort, justice over peace, we discover strength we never knew we possessed. What would you have done in Maya's position? Was exposing the Sterling family's crimes the right choice, or should she have walked away quietly? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in our darkest moments.